Hello and welcome. This is the Bits vs. Byte podcast. I'm your host, Ama Grigic, and today with me is Brian Solis. Welcome, Brian.
Hello, everybody.
Could you tell the listeners a little bit about your background and also what you are currently working on?
Well, it's a really interesting background, to say the least. I've been a digital analyst and digital anthropologist for a very long time, studying, at least at a high scale, how disruptive technologies have impacted markets and also how technologies have impacted society and individuals in a variety of capacities, whether that's customers or as just human beings or students or employees. And I try to make sense between the two of them, build bridges between the technology and the change so that I can help leaders build bridges strategically. So whether that's running more effective customer experience or employee experience programs or corporate innovation programs or what have you. And that output is in the form of reports, in the form of advisory. I've written about 8 books or so on the various topics. And I also love to blog and share ideas in social media. So that's sort of like a high level view. And what am I working on now? I guess I forgot to answer that.
Sure.
A lot right now. So there's a real interesting inflection point where I found myself affected by the same technologies that I was tracking, and ended up writing a book about how to live a much more creative and productive life without abandoning tech, but giving the relationship with tech a new purpose. And I called it Life Scale. I wanted to give it a name because there is a really interesting journey that you go through in resetting our relationship with technology to be better, be more intentional, rather than just sort of living the way that we do today with reaching for that device every second we can and reacting to every notification, and learning what those implications are and taking control of them.
Yeah. So talking about that, I think I know a lot of what you talk about, or the key areas that you talk about a lot, is also the kind of impact that social media, for example, has on our lives and stuff like that. Why is that such an important topic to you?
It was, I had no choice for it to be an important topic to me. It's funny though, because I've studied it for years. I mean, going back to 2000, I mean, even before social media and before Web 2.0, I was always looking at how, for example, in the late 90s, how the internet was changing us and how we were adapting. But I always studied it in the form of something specific, like customer experience or digital influence or some bigger purpose to kind of give it meaning to executives and to market makers.
Yeah. So
over time.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. You were going to continue on the topic.
Yeah, I just was taking pause because there's a real interesting shift between that work and then also understanding that at some point we are also users. And I was trying to write what would have been my 8th book, follow on to X, The Experience Meets When Business Meets Design, only to find myself either not inspired or not focused enough to be able to even get through the proposal stage. And that's when I realized that there was something wrong. I originally thought it was just writer's block, but I just started noticing patterns in the way that my brain was working and how often I was reaching for my phone and how many tabs I had open on the browser and how many things I had on my desktop and how many conversations I was having in Slack. And all of these things sort of made me want to research more and more and more. What are the effects of living this life? Because it wasn't always this way. And the hypothesis was, does it affect productivity and creativity? And so after spending a good year of getting down to those answers, because there was some conjecture about it, but there wasn't anything really, really scientific at the time. And so I had access to a lot of my friends in Silicon Valley who had created many of these devices and networks. And we had some really honest, off the record conversations. And I learned a lot about the design techniques that go that go into changing a user's behavior, and then also did the work to understand then once you change a user's behavior, what does that do to the brain? What does that do to your biology, your chemistry? And then how does that affect your behaviors over time? And so that was really revealing. So that's why I felt like I had to write this book, because I was affected. I was living a much more shallow, a much more task switching, multitasking, distracted life. And I was seeing and feeling its effects, but I wasn't able to sort of connect the dots as to exactly why and exactly how, so that I can then figure out exactly what to do about it. And I wasn't going to abandon tech. I wasn't going to delete a lot of the apps and services or abandon the devices that I actually need to do my job. But what I wanted to do was take a much more human-centered approach to finding a solution that was going to allow me to find a new relationship, a new social contract with my devices and tech.
Yeah. So how did you actually do it? Because I think a lot of people have problems with doing that. I mean, I know people that when they kind of forget their phone at home, they have to go back to get it, even if it's like a 5 minute drive that they need to go to the store or whatever. So how did you approach it?
That's what ended up becoming the book. At this point, I didn't know that I was going to write a book about it. I mean, I write books about business and the future of
For
technology.
sure.
The the journey, I just started doing research to figure out how to get my brain. Look, I think before we kind of get there, we should understand that there's absolutely a reason why you feel like you have to go back and get your phone. There's absolutely a reason why you can't be bored, or that you can't observe when you're sitting on a train or in a taxi or an Uber, that you have to reach for your device and constantly scroll.
Hmm.
It's by design. And so it's called persuasive design. These are all strategies. These are courses that are taught at Stanford and other places. The dark side of that persuasive design, though, is essentially creating an addictive behavior. And if you look at Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or Twitter, or you name your favorite game, they all have these design elements inherent in them because they're meant to hold your attention. That's the commodity that they're trading. That's all they have. They monetize your attention. So they have to hold it, and they have to find new ways to hold it because you're constantly changing and there's constantly new ways to capture someone's attention because it's super competitive out there.
Yeah.
the,
Sure.
the result is that your brain is rewired. It accelerates, it speeds up to keep up with all these things, and that affects how you work, how you think, how you talk. That affects how you feel the constant need to keep up that pace, because if you're not keeping up that pace and you feel like something's off or something's wrong, and over time, not just your brain is being rewired, but so is your chemistry and your biology. So you have these different chemicals that are swishing around in you as you're doing these different things, like oxytocin or serotonin or dopamine, and then your body becomes dependent on those chemicals, much like the same way it does when you become addicted to anything. And so we've had, let's see, Facebook. You could trace that back to Twitter 2006 when it really started to become popular. The iPhones around this time. You've had a very long gestation period of this transformation, this human transformation, and you're just now starting to see it because it's becoming a systemic problem. You could see it in the polarization of information, tribalism, fake news, and why everybody's willing to believe it. The the inability to be in the presence of someone without actually being distracted, the inability to write or create at depth or think at depth on command. It's just because all of these things are hitting at once, and we're just starting to take notice. The only reason I figured it out is because I hit a wall. So
Yeah.
it's a long answer because I wanted to kind of get everyone who's listening to understand that. How did I solve something? Well, we had to talk about just how deep that solution goes,
Yeah.
because
For
there's a
sure.
lot of things that if you Google it, or if you follow trends, there's meditation and mindfulness and yoga and hiking and using the Calm app, for example. Uh, there's these are all fantastic, but they treat the symptoms and they don't treat the problem. And the problem is that the more that we use this stuff, the more we change. And the more we change, a lot of things also change as well. Our perspectives, our mental models, our values systems, our purpose, a lot of just things that drive humanity. So that after a ton of research, I just kept getting back to the basics. It's like, who am I and who am I trying to be? Because what you think and actually what you do in that moment are two very different things. Turns out that a lot of times we're just trying to be like everybody else. That this idea of social proof and competing with everybody through FOMO and uh, comparisons. None of this is healthy, but it's actually how we're living our life. And so we're living our life moment to moment rather than actually finding out and exploring who we really want to be and then making those decisions to do that and then using technology as sort of an enabler to do that as opposed to how we use it today, which is just simply as a matter of uh, communication, but also as a matter of distraction. Like we feed our own distraction. So the path of life scale was a series of steps that I had documented that were working. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I documented that wasn't working. And ultimately that became every step became a chapter in the book because I felt like if I'm having these problems, other people are probably having these problems. And so let's see if I can't at least add my voice to a solution.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's great to have something like that because I think that a lot of people forget that it is so addictive, and a lot of people. Well, sometimes I've noticed it myself. Last week I was in Bosnia myself, where I don't have like internet all the time on my phone. And then when you go out and you go to a gathering or a restaurant or whatever, you notice that you're kind of you're kind of detoxing in a way where you're like you're still looking at your phone but you don't have internet. There's no new information coming in there, and I think that's actually pretty liberating in a sense where I was like I felt yeah, much more in the moment. You're with the people that you want to talk to, and I think that's one of the things that did help me. But maybe a lot of people could use that tip as well, where when they go to a social gathering, just turn on like flight mode or something like that, so you don't get distracted that much anymore. But I would love to know kind of your opinion on that. But I think it's a great way to kind of detox yourself a little bit and try and train yourself to be without your phone all the time.
Detox is certainly one of the short term uh, remedies. Again, though, it just
It's just one thing.
there's a
Yeah.
thing called oh my goodness, it'll come to me in a second. Dopamine hacking.
Hmm.
It's the same idea. But it goes deeper, right? So the reason why people go through digital detox, there's camps for this even, or regiments that you could follow.
Yeah.
That it's meant to teach you the discipline of living without devices. And at the risk of sounding spiritual, which there is an element of that spirituality to anything that you want to do, that's transcendent beyond what you do every single day, that those are your beliefs. My approach was a little bit more scientific and honest and human, just simply trying to apply these things to be easier to understand and grasp, and actually that work and move you in a new direction without being a trend or trendy or plugging into other trends. And to me, detox is one of those trends. So, for example, if you work out all weekend and then you spend the rest of the week eating, binge eating,
Yeah.
uh, that's not a healthy lifestyle. But you trick yourself into believing that you're on the right path because you do give yourself space without it. But it's only human and natural to just kind of go back to you do more of it because it's just it's just what we do in everything. Whether you're saving money, whether you're going through a diet, it's just a natural fallback. So the reason I share that is because I also tried detoxing, and I've also in my research was exploring how people felt after detox, and if I'll give you an example because this is exactly what it's about. Part of what happens when we use the devices without checking ourselves, without knowing what's happening behind the scenes, is that your body has become dependent on these behaviors because it is mental and also chemical. Right? It's called one on the mental side. It's neuroplasticity. So your brain is literally being rewired, and to do that, it's expending different types of fuels, different types of chemicals to keep up with that acceleration and that way of thinking. And then in your body, when you feel like, I don't know, you get a like or you get engagement or you have new connection requests or you have more followers, that
Mm.
triggers all kinds of like feel good chemicals as well. And so you just become dependent on it without realizing why, or even realizing that you are becoming dependent on it. So the reason why this matters is because if you go through a digital detox over the weekend, your body's only just essentially not giving itself that dose or that hit that it needs to sustain that life. So you're kind of withholding it like dopamine hacking, like you're withholding the dopamine uh, to kind of just reset your body. But the reality is that it's like if you're an addict to whatever it is and you give it up for the weekend, you haven't changed anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what this is about.
The actual change comes later on when you like push it for multiple weeks or for even longer periods of time, right?
Well, and it's not just about detox, right? I'm not giving up my device.
Mm.
Um, I'm actually just learning a better way to live with it. So that's where the dependency sort of changes. Like in anything, you have to give it a sense of purpose, and you have to give it a much more thoughtful approach to why you're here in the first place, and then where are you trying to go? Because whether it's professionally or personally, these are conversations that we're not really having because everything that we're doing right now is absolutely normal. In fact, by even thinking differently, we're not normal. It's
Mm.
it's not it's not the most popular conversation to look at one another and say, "Gosh, we're distracted. What are we going to do about it?" Because it is so important in our social fabric to be connected, to be communicating, to be sharing, to be to be highlighting the experiences that we're having. In its simplicity, it's a beautiful way to live and connect with people that we might not otherwise know. But at its heart, it has transformed sort of the, the hierarchy of society.
Yeah,
why
exactly.
why is sharing what you're doing at every moment so important? Why are the numbers associated with those experiences so important? And that's really what this conversation gets to, so that then we can have a much more productive idea about what to do moving forward. So, look, one of the things is that I didn't want to do with the book was become this preacher, like, hey, this is bad. This is what's happening to you. This is what you need to do about it. Only the first chapter is really getting to the exact change that's happened to us, because I want people to know this is what happened. And for better, for worse, you can say, no, that's cool. I don't need to keep reading. Or now that I know exactly why I feel this way, or now that I know all of the reasons why these things have been happening, I have a choice about either doing something or not doing something.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what this is about. Now, you could play this out beyond just personal. You could talk about, well, what does distractions mean at work? As an employee or as a manager or as a leader? Like, what's my workforce look like if it's actually distracted? Well, it turns out it's pretty significant. Most of us lose 2 hours a day through distraction, whether we're reaching for our phones or whether we're checking notifications, uh, or what you name it. Every time you do that, you take away from the actual task at hand. And when you take away from the task at hand, you lose things like quality, you lose things like quantity, you lose things like depth, and originality and creativity. And so I made the book about creativity. Turns out that if you focus on creativity, then you can actually unlock a part of you that's not even about technology. It's about living in a world where everybody is homogenized. Everybody has access to the same filters. Everybody's living their best life. So what would you do if you had time to build your own space and mental model to be more thoughtful and mindful and creative? And how would that execute in everything that you do? What if you didn't reach for your phone while you're in the middle of the project? How much better would that project be? What if you're a customer and you're going through life and you're totally distracted and you're trying to make a decision about your research and what to buy and which brand to buy from, and you can't settle on it because everything's just so distracting? What if a brand understood that and was able to clean up its whole journey to specifically reach you and say, I understand how crazy it is out there, but we've done these things to help you make a decision. Like, everything would just be better. And I think that's the path that I'm asking people to come on, is let's live life much more intentional, much with greater clarity and with greater creativity, so that we could solve some real problems that exist.
Exactly. Yeah. It's getting in the way of good work, good honest work. I've noticed it myself, where I see it on the well, in the office and whatever. It's just so distracting, in the sense that there's nothing worse than just talking to someone and they're on their phones, like totally not connected with what you're talking about, like, or even worse, if it's in the middle of a conversation or whatever. And I hope that will change, and some of the kind of rules we set with each other should probably also change in that respect as well. Where, I mean, I just want to have a normal conversation with someone one on one, without them grabbing their phone and doing something else, which is totally not what we're getting at in that conversation or whatever. So I have one more question, because we're a little short on time. So you've done a lot of stuff. You've written a lot of books, as you mentioned. So when you look back on all those kind of achievements and stuff like that, what are you most proud of?
I think there's two things. One is that I'm most proud of the diversity of each of the books that I've written. There's been 8, and each have focused on something different. Whereas, well, that's not true. What's the Future of Business and X were sort of brother and sister, because they built off of experience design and reimagining what that customer experience could look like. But that it's hard to say, it's hard to answer that question, because I'm already on mentally to what I want to write next, which is completely different than what I just published. And I think that comes down to sort of the reality of life, and being proud is one thing, and being, I have a lot I want to say. There's a lot of change that's happening in the world. I'm sort of driven by getting that out there, at least for now, because there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of noise, but there isn't a lot of like insight, that kind of penetrates through all of that static. And I think, if anything, the answer to your question is in the motivation to have an impact, and that I've seen in my work, and it makes me want to keep going.
Very cool. How can people find you on the internet and also find your book?
Well, they could find me on the internet at briansolis.com, briansolis.com, or on social at Brian Solis, pretty much on all the platforms. And the book is, well, wherever books are sold that you go to. Hopefully you'll find it there. If not, let me know.
No problem. Thanks a lot, Brian, for your time. And of course, for the listeners, you can find the Bits vs. Byte podcast on bitsvsbytes.com. We're also on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. It's all Bits vs. Bytes. And if you didn't subscribe to the newsletter yet, you can find it on bitsvsbytes.com/newsletter. And you'll get an email every 2 weeks with 5 things about technology, business, and leadership. And I would like to thank you for listening. Until next time.